Hello. Here are a few words about Jubilee. Jubilee comes to us from the Old Testament. The word itself in Hebrew refers to a ram and by extension to a ram's horn, which served as a trumpet to be sounded on certain occasions. In Leviticus 25, a horn, this time a shofar, is to be sounded to announce the 50th year, and the 50th year is given the name Jubilee. In this chapter, Leviticus 25, Jubilee means release and restoration, release from crippling debt and the restoration of families to their land. Two theological premises lie behind Jubilee. The first is that the land belongs to God. The people are aliens and tenants on God's land. The second premise is that God has granted life on the land to Israel, to all the people of Israel, as a gift. And as God is holy, so Israel, God's people, are to be holy. A part of this holiness on God's part and Israel's consists in concern for the poor. For example, people with vineyards and grain fields must leave some of their produce for the poor to gather or harvest. But this means that some people, the poor Israelites, were without vineyards or grain fields, even though all of Israel had been granted a share in the land. Just as today, families in ancient Israel could fall into crippling debt. This could be because of crop failure, mismanagement, or any variety of reasons. If a family could not pay their debts, they could become indentured to, that is, become slaves of, someone, until they were able to pay off their debt. In extreme circumstances, a family might stand to lose their land altogether. In that case, a member of the extended family had the right and the responsibility to acquire the land so that it would remain within the extended family. For example, let's imagine that a family, the Johnson family, aunts, uncles, cousins, inherited a large tract of farmland in Illinois. One couple, Sam and Barbara Johnson, owned a small farm as part of the larger Johnson family estate. Because of a drought, their crops failed to flourish and their harvest was small. To buy seed for the following year, Sam and Barbara went into debt. Another crop failure left them unable to pay their debt. They were forced to sell their land. But Sam had a cousin, Aloysius Johnson, who was wealthy. His farm had better soil and access to water he could use to irrigate his crops. As a relative, Aloysius had the right to buy the land, to redeem it, the Old Testament would say, and to add it to his ever larger portion of the Johnson family estate. Sam and Barbara were now without land and were left in desperate poverty, despite the redemption of their farm for the extended Johnson family. They had no choice but to become servants, slaves, to a family with wealth. Jubilee provides a remedy for that kind of situation. In the 50th year, Sam and Barbara Johnson, or their descendants, would be released from their servitude, and their land would be restored to them, which meant, of course, divestment on the part of those who had managed in the preceding 50 years to accumulate land and servants. In the context of ancient Israel, Jubilee was directed against the creation of permanent and massive disparity between rich and poor. against the endless accumulation of wealth by some people and the entrenched poverty of others, against homelessness and slavery. Jubilee reminds Israel that all of them, all the people, are aliens and tenants on God's land, whose produce they enjoy as a gift of God's grace. Jubilee was not simply an economic or social justice program. It was an effort toward God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven. Other parts of the Bible address Jubilee issues without mentioning Jubilee or 50 years. Deuteronomy 15, for example, requires the cancellation of debts every 7th year, something not mentioned in the Jubilee text, Leviticus 25. And Jesus, in Luke 4, proclaims that the Spirit of the Lord has anointed him and sent him to proclaim release to the captives and freedom to the oppressed. The word release in this sermon of Jesus in Nazareth is the same one used for forgiveness of debts in Deuteronomy, also translated liberty in Leviticus 25:10. You shall proclaim liberty or release, forgiveness throughout the land in the year of Jubilee. Among Christians, the term forgiveness or release lost most of its original economic meaning, so that forgiveness and Jubilee had to do only with forgiveness of sins. Even among us Mennonites, while the Lord's prayer in Matthew speaks explicitly of forgiving our debts as we forgive our debtors, we are told to speak instead of sins and sins against us. Why? That I should pray for forgiveness of my sins goes without saying, but why have we Mennonites, along with medieval Christianity, erased the economic meaning of the Lord's Prayer, as if it were not part of the Sermon on the Mount? Jubilee is about release, forgiveness, and restoration. In Jesus Christ, the Lord of Jubilee, we need not wait 50 years.